The moment Lydia realized the man she had just dumped a full glass of ice water on was her new hospital department chief. She wanted the floor of the emergency room to open up and swallow her whole. It had happened so fast. 1 second she was crossing the hallway with a cup of water meant for her friend Tony, who was having a panic attack in the break room, and the next she rounded the corner and walked straight into a man who was, from her angle, gripping Tony's wrist and refusing to let go. Lydia didn't think. She just reacted. The water left the cup before she had consciously decided to throw it. The man released Tony's wrist immediately, not because of the water, it turned out, but because Tony had just finished handing him the signed paperwork he had been waiting for. He stood there in a charcoal gray suit that now had a dark spreading stain across the chest. His expression caught somewhere between shock and something that looked dangerously close to amusement. "What is wrong with you?" Lydia hissed, pulling Tony behind her. "You don't grab people like that." He looked down at his shirt, then back at her. "She was handing me documents." Tony tugged at Lydia's sleeve from behind. "Lydia," she whispered urgently. "Lydia, stop." But Lydia was already going. "I saw you grab her arm." She was about to drop the folder. "That is not your call to make." He tilted his head slightly and said, with the patience of someone who had decided this was going to be a very interesting afternoon, "You're right. I should have let the quarterly reports hit the floor." He picked up the folder that had, in fact, slipped from Tony's hands during the commotion and was now lying at his feet. He straightened, looked at Lydia one more time, then walked away without another word. Tony grabbed her arm. "That was Dr. Calloway." Lydia blinked. "Who?" "Elliot Calloway, the new chief of internal medicine. He starts officially tomorrow." Tony stared at her. "You just poured water on our new department, Chief Lydia?" The name hit like a delayed detonation. Lydia had heard it, of course. Everyone at Mercy General had been talking about Elliot Calloway for the past 2 weeks. Renowned, recruited from Johns Hopkins, youngest chief in the hospital's recent history. She had just soaked him with ice water and told him he didn't know how to behave around people. She stood in that hallway for a long moment after he disappeared around the corner. Then she straightened her white coat, took a breath and said, mostly to herself, he still shouldn't have grabbed her wrist. Tony gave her a look. "He barely touched me." "I didn't know that." "You also didn't ask." That was true. Lydia didn't have a great response to it. So she went back to the nurse's station and tried to forget the whole thing had happened. She was 32 years old, a senior hospitalist at Mercy General in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she had worked too hard for too long to derail herself over one impulsive moment in a hallway. She had paid her way through medical school largely on her own, after her father's business collapsed her sophomore year of college. She had done 2 residencies back-to-back, slept in her car twice during a brutal attending stretch in her late 20s, and built a reputation at this hospital as someone you wanted on a difficult case. She wasn't going to let one bad 30 seconds define the next chapter. She almost convinced herself it would blow over. The next morning, Dr. Elliot Calloway walked into the department-wide orientation meeting in a fresh suit and introduced himself to the assembled staff with the kind of calm confidence that made the room go quiet without him having to ask. He was tall and measured in the way he moved, the kind of person who took up exactly as much space as he needed and no more. When his eyes swept the room during introductions, they landed on Lydia for exactly 1 beat longer than anyone else's. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. He just moved on. She spent the rest of the morning convinced she was being paranoid. By afternoon, she was less sure. He called her into his office at 4 o'clock. Not through his assistant, through a handwritten note left on her desk that said simply, "Dr. Okafor, my office, 4 p.m. Calloway." She stared at it for a solid minute before folding it in half and walking down the hall. His office was organized with the precision of someone who had unpacked and settled in within 24 hours. She knocked twice. He told her to come in without looking up from his computer. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Sit down." She didn't. "I'll stand if that's all right." He looked up then, and she saw for the first time in proper light that he was maybe 37 or 38, with the kind of focused stillness that either meant exceptional self-control or extreme boredom, and she genuinely could not tell which. "Suit yourself," he said. She crossed her arms. "If this is about yesterday, I want to say that I acted based on what I observed, and what I observed looked like. I read your file." She stopped. 3 commendations in 4 years. Lowest readmission rate in the department 2 years running. You're the person the night shift calls when something doesn't make sense. He folded his hands on his desk. "I also read that you once filed a formal complaint against an attending for speaking to a patient in a way you found inappropriate, even though it cost you a letter of recommendation." Lydia said nothing. I'm not going to write you up for yesterday, he said. You were protecting someone you thought was in trouble. That's not a punishable instinct. He paused. Your aim, however, is a problem I'd prefer not to revisit. She almost laughed. She didn't. Understood, that's all. She turned to leave, then stopped with her hand on the door. Something made her turn back. For what it's worth, she said. I did think you were hurting her. I know you did, he said. He had already returned to his screen. That's the only reason this conversation went the way it did. She left without responding, and she didn't fully understand why her heartbeat felt strange for the rest of the afternoon. Over the following weeks, Lydia threw herself into the new rhythms of the department. Elliot ran a tighter ship than the previous chief. More structured morning rounds, clearer documentation expectations, no tolerance for the kind of casual corner cutting that had crept in over the years. Half the floor hated him for it within the first week. The other half grudgingly admitted the department was running better. Lydia was in the second half, though she would not have said so out loud. He called her in for consultations more often than he called anyone else. At first, she told herself it was because her case numbers were the strongest, and maybe it was. But he also had a habit of asking her opinion, after he had already stated his own, in a way that made it clear he was genuinely curious whether she agreed or not. No one had done that with her before, not really. Most attendings wanted confirmation. He seemed to want friction. You disagree, he said one evening in March, after she had been quiet for a moment too long while he walked through a differential. I think you're right about the primary diagnosis, she said carefully. I think you're missing something secondary. Tell me, she told him. He listened without interrupting, asked two sharp questions, and then said, order the additional panel. Let's see. He was right about the primary. She was right about the secondary. They both were. The patient went home 4 days earlier than projected. After that, he started leaving the door to his office open when he wasn't in a meeting. She was never entirely sure if it was an invitation or just a habit, but she started stopping in when she had a question rather than emailing, and it saved them both time. Tony noticed before Lydia did. You've been smiling more, Tony said one afternoon in April, handing her a coffee in the break room. I smile. Not like that, you don't. Tony studied her. Is it Calloway? Don't be ridiculous. You talk about him like he's a problem you're trying to solve. He is a problem I'm trying to solve. He changed the discharge protocol, and the new forms take twice as long to complete. Tony did not look convinced. Lydia changed the subject. She was good at that. The shift happened gradually, and then all at once, the way most things do. In early May, a patient on the 4th floor coded unexpectedly during the tail end of Lydia's overnight shift, and she and Elliot worked the case together for 40 minutes before they got him stable. By the time it was over, the adrenaline had nowhere to go, and they both ended up standing in the stairwell outside the unit, in the particular drained silence that follows something close. He leaned against the wall. She sat on a step. Good catch on the rhythm strip, he said. You would have seen it. I didn't, though. You did. He was quiet for a moment. You good? The question caught her off guard. Not good work or get some rest. Just you good, like a person asking another person. Yeah, she said, after a second. I'm okay. This is the part of the job no one tells you about, he said. Not really to her, more to the stairwell wall. They prepare you for the medicine. Nobody prepares you for the 40 minutes after. She looked at him. Does it get easier? He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. No. You just get better at where to put it. They stayed in the stairwell for another few minutes without talking, and it was the most comfortable silence Lydia had experienced in years. She noticed it, filed it away, and said nothing. In June, the hospital held its annual charity gala. Black tie, $500 a plate, half the city's medical establishment crammed into a downtown ballroom. Lydia went because her department head expected it, and because Tony would never forgive her if she skipped. She wore a deep burgundy gown her mother had talked her into at Christmas, and had spent the 2 hours since arrival making small talk with people she half recognized from conferences. She was reaching for her second glass of sparkling water when Elliot appeared beside her. She had not expected him to look the way he looked. She had seen him every day for 3 months in a white coat or scrubs. In a black tuxedo, he was an entirely different category of problem. She felt herself recalibrate, and then immediately felt irritated at herself for recalibrating. You look like you're counting the minutes until this is over, he said. I'm fine. You've been standing in the same corner for 40 minutes. It's a good corner. He held out a hand. Dance with me. She looked at the hand. That's not, we're colleagues. Colleagues can dance. He tilted his head toward the floor. It'll give you something to do besides count minutes. She took his hand before she had properly decided to. The thing about Elliot was that he gave her almost no space to overthink, which she suspected was entirely intentional. On the dance floor, he was composed and unhurried, and kept a perfectly respectful distance, which somehow made the whole thing worse because it gave her nothing to be sensibly defensive about. "You grew up in Charlotte?" he asked. "Detroit. I came here for my second residency and never left." She glanced up. "You?" "Chicago originally, then Baltimore for school, then everywhere." A pause. "You ever think about going back, Detroit?" She considered it. "My mom is still there. I go back for holidays." She paused. "Sometimes I think I will, eventually. Open a practice, slow down." She stopped herself. "Why are you asking? Because you clearly love this city, but you hold it at arm's length," he said simply. "Like you love it the way you love something you're not sure you're allowed to keep." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. And the song ended, and they stepped apart. He drove her home that night after the gala. Her car was in the shop, and the Uber surge pricing was offensive, she told herself. And at her building's entrance he said, "Good night, Lydia," and did nothing else. And she stood at the lobby door watching his car pull away for a moment longer than made sense. She was in trouble and she knew it. The next morning, she did the only sensible thing, and called her mother. "I think I like someone," she said. Finally, her mother said, with the energy of someone who had been waiting years for this call. "Who is he?" "He's complicated." "Is he married?" "No." "Does he like you back?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Probably not." "Lydia." Her mother's voice was gentle in the way only her mother's voice was. "You have been telling yourself probably not about everything good in your life for 15 years. At some point you have to let something be possible." Lydia was quiet for a long time. Outside her apartment window, Charlotte was doing its Saturday morning thing. Joggers, dog walkers, somebody's kid on a scooter. "He's my department chief," she finally said. "So figure it out like the smart woman I raised," her mother said. "But don't talk yourself out of it before it even starts." Lydia hung up and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the stairwell in May. She thought about the way he had said you good like it was the most natural thing. She thought about how she hadn't let anything be possible in a very long time. Meanwhile, Tony had been doing something Lydia didn't know about. Tony's cousin, Renelle, had dated Elliot briefly 6 years ago, before medical school, and Tony had reconnected with Renelle at a family event in April. Renelle, who had never quite stopped carrying a candle for Elliot, had asked about him when Tony mentioned his name. The conversation started there and had been quietly going places ever since. In July, Renelle showed up at Mercy General on a Saturday, officially to have lunch with Tony, but primarily to see Elliot. She was beautiful and confident, and had the ease of someone who knew exactly the effect she had, and she arrived at the hospital with the particular precision of a person who had planned the encounter to look unplanned. Lydia didn't know any of this. She ran into them in the lobby, Tony, Renelle, and Elliot, all three of them laughing at something, and felt something she recognized with mortifying clarity as jealousy, which she immediately told herself was unreasonable. She smiled, said something about catching up later, kept walking. That evening, Tony stopped by her apartment. "That was my cousin Renelle," she said, before Lydia could pretend the afternoon hadn't happened. "I figured she was a cousin or something. She and Elliot know each other from before." "Okay." She asked me about him. "I may have mentioned he's also." Tony paused. "I didn't know things had gotten. I didn't realize you." "Tony." Lydia held up a hand. "You didn't do anything wrong. We're colleagues." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Tony sat down on Lydia's couch and looked at her with the particular patience of someone who had known her for 7 years. "You know what your problem is? You're so used to protecting everyone else that you don't know how to let anyone do the same for you. So the minute something starts to feel real, you hand it a label, colleague, complicated, probably not, and you walk away from it before it can walk away from you." Lydia sat across from her. She didn't say anything for a long moment. "She seems lovely," she finally said. "She is," Tony admitted. "She's also still in love with a version of him that doesn't exist anymore." She paused. "I'm just saying. I may have accidentally made something harder for you. I wanted to say that." After Tony left, Lydia sat in her apartment for a long time and thought about what it would feel like to just let something be possible. It felt like standing at the edge of something. She was still thinking about it when her phone buzzed. It was Elliot. "You left early this afternoon. Everything okay?" She stared at the message for a full minute. Then she typed back, "I'm fine, sorry. Got something I needed to take care of." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "You don't have to apologize for leaving." A pause. "But for the record, she's not. Whatever you might have thought about this afternoon isn't what it was." She read that twice, set her phone down, picked it back up, typed, "You don't have to explain anything to me." His reply was almost immediate. "I know I don't have to. I wanted to." Lydia looked at that sentence for a long time. She typed, "Good night, Elliot." First time she had used his first name outside the stairs. He replied, "Good night." Things shifted after that, the way barometric pressure shifts before weather. You can't point to the exact moment, but you know something is different. In August, Lydia was covering a late shift when she got a call from her mother. Her father, whom her parents had divorced when Lydia was in high school, and with whom she had a careful, functional relationship, had been taken to a hospital in Detroit with chest pain. It was probably not serious, her mother said, but probably not wasn't a word Lydia used for her father's chest. She arranged for coverage and booked the first flight she could get. She was in the elevator, heading to the locker room when Elliot stepped in beside her. He took one look at her and said, "What happened?" She told him. He listened without interrupting, then pressed the lobby button instead of the parking level. "I'll drive you to the airport. You don't have to, Lydia." His voice was quiet. "Let me." She let him. In the car, they didn't talk much. He put on the radio low and drove and didn't try to fill the silence with words that wouldn't help. When they pulled up to the departures terminal, she unbuckled and reached for her bag, and he said, "Call me when you know something." She looked at him. "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because I want to know you're okay, and because you've been carrying things alone long enough that it's become invisible to you." A pause. "I see it." She didn't trust her voice for a moment. "I have to go." "I know, go." He paused. "Your dad's going to be fine." She made it through security before she cried, which she considered a reasonable performance under the circumstances. Her father was fine. Elevated cardiac enzymes, some stenting required, but nothing catastrophic. She stayed 3 days. During those 3 days, Elliot texted her twice, once to check in, once to send her a news article about something they'd been discussing at work that was so normal and so completely undramatic that it made her laugh out loud in her father's hospital room, which confused both her parents. When she came back to Charlotte, things were different in a way she stopped trying to argue with. The turn happened in September. Renelle, it became clear, had decided that her reconnection with Elliot was going to become something more whether or not he was interested. She started showing up at the hospital more often, leaving things on Tony's desk that conveniently needed to be forwarded to Elliot, finding reasons to be in spaces where he would be. Lydia watched this with the careful composure of someone who had become very good at not showing what she felt. Then Tony, mortified by what she had inadvertently set in motion, made a decision. She sat Lydia down in the break room on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 coffees and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it this time." "Okay." Renelle told me she's planning to ask Elliot to dinner this week, formally. In front of people, apparently, so he feels like it'd be rude to say no. Tony folded her hands. "She's my cousin and I love her, but that is a manipulation tactic, not a date request, and I am not going to sit here and watch it work while you do your thing, where you decide none of this is your business." Lydia was quiet. "You like him," Tony said. "He likes you. Everyone with functional eyes has been able to see this since May. At some point you have to stop protecting yourself from good things and just let one happen." It was almost exactly what her mother had said in June. Lydia thought about that. She went to Elliot's office at 5 o'clock, when most of the floor had cleared out. She knocked twice. He said, "Come in." She closed the door behind her. He looked up and then looked more carefully, the way he did when he had identified that a situation required his full attention. "Lydia, I'm not very good at this," she said. "I want to say that up front so you have realistic expectations." He set down his pen. "I have been telling myself for 4 months that you are my department chief and that is the correct place to stop." She crossed her arms, then made herself uncross them. "I don't think I can keep doing that. I also don't know what to do with that information, so I'm just telling you. Because apparently I have run out of more sensible options." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked around his desk, and stopped in front of her. Close, but not close enough to be anything other than a choice she would have to participate in making. 4 months, he said. "At least. I've been waiting since the ice water." She laughed, a real one, out of her. "That's insane. You were defending someone," he said. "You were wrong about the facts, and you didn't care, because the principle was more important to you than being right." He was looking at her in the steady, exact way he looked at things he intended to understand completely. "I found that very hard to walk away from." "You walked away fine," she said. "You didn't even look back." "I looked back in the elevator," he said. "You weren't watching." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I'm watching now." He leaned forward and kissed her, unhurriedly, the way he did everything, as though he had enough confidence in the outcome that he didn't need to rush it. She kissed him back, and somewhere in the process she let go of the thing she had been holding at arm's length for years. It was terrifying. It also felt exactly like putting something down that had been heavy for long enough. The next few months were the happiest Lydia could remember in a long time. Being with Elliot was easy in the way that things are easy when they're right, and hard in the way that they're hard when they're real. They disagreed about things, had to navigate the workplace situation with care, hit occasional friction about his long hours and her habit of not asking for help, but they navigated it. They kept navigating it. He showed up consistently in the small ways that turn out to matter more than the large ones. In November, they flew to Detroit for Thanksgiving. Her mother opened the door, looked at Elliot, and immediately turned to Lydia with an expression that said, "I," knew it so loudly that no words were required. Her father shook Elliot's hand and then disappeared into the kitchen to start an interrogations, disguised as a conversation about sports, which Elliot handled with the same unruffled patience he brought to everything. That night after her parents went to bed, Lydia and Elliot sat on the back porch in the cold with cups of tea, and she leaned her head against his shoulder and felt, for possibly the first time in her adult life, like she wasn't managing something. In December, Renelle called Tony to announce she was seeing someone new and had decided to stop reaching out to Elliot. Tony relayed this information to Lydia with the barely suppressed relief of someone who had been carrying a piece of guilt for 6 months. Lydia told her she'd already let it go and meant it. What she hadn't let go of, and what she was still working out how to talk about, was the question of what happened next. She had spent so many years building a life that was entirely her own construction, her career, her apartment, her careful self-sufficiency, that the idea of genuinely folding another person into it was both the thing she wanted most and the thing that scared her in a way she didn't have good vocabulary for yet. She told Elliot this in January, in her kitchen at midnight, while she was supposed to be making tea and instead just stood there holding the kettle until he walked in and asked what she was thinking. She told him. He listened to all of it, then he said, "You know what I notice about you?" She looked at him. "You build things to last. Your career, your friendships, the way you treat your patients. You build things and then you maintain them, even when it costs you." He paused. "You're not going to love someone halfway. You're going to love them so thoroughly that it frightens you. That's not a warning sign." He crossed to her and took the kettle gently out of her hands. "That's the whole point." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're very good at saying the right thing. I have my moments." He turned on the kettle. "For what it's worth, I have no interest in being something you manage. I want to be something you choose. Every day," she said quietly, and she meant it. In February, he proposed. No grand gesture, no staged restaurant moment, just the two of them on a Sunday morning in his apartment, with the rain coming down outside and coffee going cold because they'd forgotten about it. And he said, without preamble, "I want to spend the rest of my life figuring out what I don't know yet. I want to do that with you." He had a ring, which surprised her even though it probably shouldn't have. She said yes. She didn't have to think about it for more than 4 seconds, which was the fastest she had made any major decision in her adult life, and which told her everything she needed to know about the quality of this one. Her mother, when she called to tell her, burst into tears and said she had known since November. Her father said gruffly, "About time," which was the highest praise available in his particular emotional vocabulary. Tony screamed so loudly in the break room the next morning that 2 nurses came running to see if someone had coded. They were married in June, on a clear afternoon, at a small venue outside Charlotte, with her parents and his mother and a collection of friends who had, over the years, become the family she had chosen. The ceremony was short and honest, and at one point she laughed at something the officiant said. And Elliot looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was both a problem he had already solved and one he was content to keep working on forever. She had spent her 30s bracing for the cost of caring about things. She had trained herself to hold everything important at a slight distance, so that losing it wouldn't take her out completely. It had been, she understood now, a very efficient way of making sure she never fully had anything. The woman who had poured ice water on a stranger in a hospital hallway and been prepared to defend that decision had needed exactly the kind of person who would find that worth remembering rather than resenting. She hadn't known that at the time. She knew it now. And on their first morning as a married couple, when she woke up before him and lay there in the early light listening to him breathe, she thought, this is what possible looks like. She had been wrong about probably not her whole life. It turned out some things were actually just yes.